Hello and welcome everyone to Taco Movie Talks. We are in week 13 for all you numerologists out there who maybe believe that 13 is an unlucky number, but you're here and I thank you for joining. I also thank you for liking and subscribing. It means a lot. And hopefully it gets this video some exposure so that more people can see foreign films. And this is certainly a foreign film fiesta because we have Kurosawa, Igmar Bergman, Lucio Fulci, and Lars Von Trier. And it's kind of a wild array of directors for sure. And, it spans the globe a pretty good bit. And I think these are probably some of the foreign directors that a lot of people would be familiar with because they kind of go across a lot of different genres. We have more serious films um, all the way around, quite frankly. But, you have Lars von Trier, probably the most darkest kind of interpretation as far as movies go. He is very much his own beast. And Fulci is kind of like that classic horror. Kurosawa is like the foreign blockbuster esque director, and then Igmar Bergman, very very emotionally based movies. Um, and there's a lot of similarities between all of these guys, but getting into foreign film, it's not obviously a requirement to like cinema, but if you do like cinema, I think watching foreign film can it can really open you up to a lot of experiences that you might not have been expecting. Quite frankly, Kurosawa was probably one of the first foreign directors in my journey of trying to dive deep into cinema that made me want to watch different films than what I had been accustomed to. And I think a lot of people go through a phase. I was talking with one of my co-hosts, Matt, about this, and you only want to watch newer movies. You only want to watch like the most recent blockbuster and stuff that's a certain age. You're like, oh, I'm not interested in that, and anything that's not Hollywood, we kind of think of, and wrongly so, that it's a worse product. And after, getting more exposure, and I wouldn't say I'm a foreign film expert by any means, I would implore anyone who has maybe only dipped their toes or hasn't at all really watched foreign films, it's really worth it. I know that, closed captioning or subtitles can be a big obstacle for a lot of people. And I'm not a huge reader in general, and I'm talking about books now, of course, but it is something that I did enjoy for a good bit of time, and then once I started watching movies just about every day, um, haven't quite had the time to read, and I was never like a fast reader or anything, but it doesn't really feel like reading after a certain point because once you kind of almost get in a rhythm with how the closed captioning is coming at you, and you just it's natural to just kind of be looking there, and you don't really miss anything. If I mean, you don't miss much, if anything, um, on the screen. And I would want to hear from you, my loyal viewers. And if I have any lawyer viewers, hit me up because I might need you. Um, Not any particular case that's on the books right now, but you never know. But anywho, I would like to know like what's your favorite region to watch movies, like foreign films, I guess, to you, and what's your favorite foreign director? Because I think that is almost just a tough a question to ask, especially with seasoned cinemaphiles, as your favorite director, period. Because I think a lot of people's lists have a lot of foreign directors ingrained in them. Um, Honestly, my favorite directors have kind of evolved from, I mean, it was Tarantino. I really liked, um, I loved the director of Inception, Christopher Nolan. I really fell in love with him with The Dark Knight, but then the more I started to watch him, the more I started to like him. And Scorsese was definitely up there too, just because, you know, Goodfellas and The Departed were two of my favorite movies. But now I'm starting to get to the point where the more foreign films I watch, the more these foreign directors are starting to creep up into my top five. And who knows? I mean, maybe eventually, after I watch so much of them and love so many of their movies, I'll say, I'm surprised, but I guess this is my favorite director, and I've included two of them for sure in Akira Kurosawa and Ingmar Bergman. They are two directors that I think are critically acclaimed, and I've watched six movies from each of them, and I mean, it is all at the quality that is just like really enjoy to absolutely love. So, I mean, for a director to have just that many and to know I haven't even exhausted their entire filmography is pretty nuts to think about. But let's start with a movie because I know that's what you're all here for. And this one is Rashomon by Akira Kurosawa, 1950. And this was what I have read and what I have discerned is kind of the movie that catapulted him into the eyes, into the minds, and maybe even into the hearts of Western audiences. And it's quite clear to see once you watch this movie because the narrative structure, how it kind of keeps you on your toes the whole way through, and how little pieces of information get brought together, and also how you can kind of discern certain truths despite the fact that the narrative keeps changing. So we have what is a trial in, I want to say, 17th century Japan, where a samurai of sorts has been murdered, and there's two eyewitnesses, which later turns into three eyewitnesses who said that they saw what happened. One is a bandit who's a quite famous bandit, actually. One is the wife, and then the third that we could be possibly doubtful of is just kind of a villager who was going to cut trees, and he had his own version of the story too. But we get many different versions of the same story, both lies and possible truths baked in, and you start to kind of form your own opinion on everything according to what is said, maybe that matches up with other stories, and then maybe what was left out. Um, that is like key details that were left out that could possibly point you to the truth. And I would think, I watched this maybe a couple of weeks ago now and didn't record it immediately in hopes of being able to kind of put it in an episode that would fit really well. And I think this is a good fit for it to have a foreign film episode. But and this is going to get into spoiler territory, and I don't think it would ruin the film, but I certainly understand. So if you want to skip forward until the next slide comes up, that's when I will be done with my spoiler discussion. But I think my interpretation of what happened might be kind of the one they want you to come to, and that is that the villager, kind of lied about his story because he did steal the knife. But despite this kind of indiscretion, he's not a bad person, and what he did was for good reasons because he has so many kids, and he even willingly takes on a baby at the end that leads to a priest kind of having a renowned or a refound rather, um, kind of belief in humanity and that we are not so corrupted. But it's very interesting how it kind of shows how each person is flawed, how human nature really kind of is, truly. And as far as accessibility, I find it very accessible, although it has some kind of, narrative and plot devices that can make it very, very interesting. But the fact that it's not a straight story might make it slightly confusing. But I think for the majority of audiences, if you sit in on this and are excited to see it and you're like paying attention to everything and you're trying to figure it out, I mean, I think you're going to really enjoy it, you're going to understand it, and you're going to get the most out of it. And this film I gave a 5 out of 5 stars. If you heard the episode with Guillermo, which again, thank you for checking that episode out. Thank you for liking that video. And if you like that content and this content, again, subscribe. But I had talked about where that kind of ranked in my rankings. But if you haven't seen that episode, and I do implore you to, and the ranking isn't till the very end, so if you want to watch this rankings, you can watch pretty much 99% of that video too and get a lot out of it. But these are all movies that I have absolutely, I mean, I really, really like all of these movies by Kurosawa. And Seven Samurai is definitely a magnum opus of magnum opuses. And I apologize for the weird pronunciation, but I'm just I feel this way so strongly that uh, sometimes it makes you get some marbles in the mouth. But to me, I really enjoy the time period dramas, and I know you're kind of, I mean, and that is the majority of this list. That's kind of what I seek out. However, I mean, as you can see, High and Low and Akiru, both pretty dang high. And honestly, the only one that isn't above 4 stars is Throne of Blood. And that is the movie here that I think is most worthy of a rewatch. Um, I this and it's funny because it's always one of the lower rated movies for a director or what have you. That is what got me to watch more of them. And I think a lot of people who have done some extensive movie watching will, I would love to hear your opinion and whether you agree on this. But I think it helps to build up an appreciation for the style, for kind of how to consume the movie as a whole, and then you can kind of taste flavors that you didn't really pick up before. So Throne of Blood was the first one I watched, and I think sometime in the future I'm going to have to rewatch it because I think there was a lot there that I wasn't able to fully appreciate that would probably bump it into the top 5. But I have to say, I think it's going to be hard to kind of knock off a lot of these films because 1 through 3, which is Seven Samurai, High and Low, which is a modern, for the time of the filming, masterpiece by Kurosawa, which really shows kind of the two styles of filmmaking that he is at the very peak of. Um, to to kind of show that diversity, that strength, the kind of intangibles where it's like he can transfer skills from a very specific genre to another and really not miss a beat. But I mean, the top 3 are all 5-star movies. That's, I mean, that's hard to overcome. And Yojimba is kind of like my sentimental favorite. Um, I think it was the second Kurosawa movie I watched, and there's so much charm to that movie, and I kind of want to watch the follow up to it as well, which I believe is Sanjuro. a companion piece where Mifune plays the same character. And I think it's very much more comedic based from what I've read. But I mean, this is a very good top six. And the insane thing about it is these are just the six movies I've watched. And understandably, I didn't go out of my way to try to choose one that was kind of critically panned. Not that I think he has too many of those. I mean, I obviously kind of went out to check ones that I thought I would like the most as the voice cracks at just the right level there. But yeah, it's pretty insane to have a top six this good, and it's just six that I've watched because I think that could compete with most directors' top sixes if you've seen even like 10 to 15 of their movies. But before I talk about Kurosawa too much, and truly I don't think you can, but I want to get on with our next movie, and it is Hour of the Wolf by Ingmar Bergman, 1968. And I have to say, for late 60s, and obviously my perception of kind of how horror has evolved isn't quite probably in tune with the reality of it because I didn't grow up during that time period. I'm kind of looking at it as from the perspective of a historian who is just being introduced to the topic. Just a little drinky break there. But it seems to really kind of, I think, push forward the psychological thriller genre. It's Ingmar Bergman's first and only horror film, which is a mashup I honestly never knew I needed until I finished this movie. Because honestly, it does the build up spectacularly well. But I didn't know for sure if it was a horror movie or not. And let me explain because I think I had seen it on lists of like top horror movies. But the first, I don't even know time wise, maybe 30 minutes. I was not quite sure. And I thought, oh, maybe I just got the title mixed up. Maybe it wasn't, especially because I watched it on Criterion, and the kind of the cover art for it is different when you click on just the movie as opposed to what the poster is on Letterbox, which is, the app that I use most frequently to find movies. So I'm like, oh, maybe it's not that movie, maybe it's not a horror movie. I was kind of unsure. And it ramps up. It gets to, at certain parts, you're like, okay, this is kind of like, this is messing with my head. And it really gets you into the mindset of like just kind of losing your bearings. And then when you get to the end, which is kind of, it's almost like a fever dream slash dream for our main character, the Max Sandow. It's That's when it was like, okay, this is full on horror. I mean, there was some like a kind of disturbing moment, and it still plays pretty disturbing, where there was kind of physical, it was violent. Um, it wasn't gratuitous in that like what was actually shown, but it was disturbing violence at a certain part. And you also get the sense that they are ghosts, but you're not quite sure like what these ghosts are, memories or kind of just figments of the imagination. But the absolute ending is what, like, it stuck the landing, in my opinion. And I think I would like to know, anyone who has seen this movie, how did you feel about the ending? Because normally it wouldn't, to kind of end with just an interview where it's just like it's very much just a comment on what had happened. But it had been, they had laid the groundwork for almost just kind of a certain question which is when you spend a lot of time with people, like you start to look alike, do you also think you start to think alike? And it it was honestly, it was one of those like kind of deep questions that it made me think, and it there was like a little bit of terror there. Just that kind of question, especially with the circumstances that this movie frames the question. So to me, this was an absolutely great horror movie. I think it went into my top 10 all time horror movies and is pretty dang high up on my Bergman list. And this movie has something in common with Rashomon because it is now number 3 on the list for the director who made it. And that is Bergman's Rankings so far. And for the people who have watched, I think you know my love for Persona and Autumn Sonata. If you watch those episodes, or if this is the first episode you've watched and you have seen these movies, well, first off, let me know what you think about the ranking. What is your ranking? What's your favorite Bergman film? Because I think a lot of people kind of agree that Persona is their favorite, or not agree. I mean, they come to their own conclusion that they like Persona a lot, and there is a lot to like about it. And kind of the way that Bergman can play with psychology, I think, is something that gets overlooked. They really like to kind of peg him down for, and it's a good amount of themes that he has, but they do recur in over his filmography. But I think one thing that we need to really and truly appreciate and hold up high is that his sense of human psychology is among, I think, the best, because you have to have a mastery kind of how people in general think, how we interpret our surroundings, kind of everything about it, to be able to kind of put the monkey wrench to it and like, hey, this is going to make people uncomfortable if we just kind of loosen this nut or this bolt a little bit. And that is what he's kind of able to do with most of these films. Everything has a psychological element to it where we get to see how these events have a profound effect on the characters in each story. But, Hour of the Wolf, I think, is a tremendous horror film. As far as I know, a lot of criticism that comes from kind of earlier horror films, and this isn't even that early, but for some people, 60s might be a dated horror film, which as far as me, like, I think even the Universal horror movies you can find an appreciation for. And when they took them off of Peacock, I was so disappointed. I wanted to do like episodes on them. I don't have access to it anymore. Hopefully it gets brought back to Peacock or some streaming service. I'm sure there's going to be um, something where they're at, but uh, it is, I think, top tier horror film because what it relies on to scare you is still relevant. And that is something that is, I think, really important in a horror movie. And the story is so compelling that you can enjoy that as they're laying the groundwork. It shows true mastery on the part of Bergman, and I think it's one of his greatest films. Period. So I wonder if the top 3 or even maybe top 5 is going to be absolutely locked in. But the Seventh Seal, again, I've went over that a few times here, but I just kind of like the visual nature of it and how the story unfolds, and it's a really good character study, and I honestly think it's very iconic. I think it's something that a lot of people, and it's been, it gets reintroduced every so often. I think the image of death on the beach was something that I was actually introduced via. Oh man, it's the Excellent Adventure with Keanu Reeves, and was it Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, the first one, way back. That's where I was introduced to it, and then I watched this film, kind of knowing that that very iconic scene was in it, and it uh, did not disappoint whatsoever. Cries and Whispers is maybe one of the most guttural of the movies, and maybe only challenged by Autumn Sonata and Persona. The the emotion is just so raw and real that it is an amazing movie. I feel like I might have ranked it or rated it a little bit too low. That might be one just to rewatch, because you could make a really easy argument that it surpasses the Seventh Seal. And then Wild Strawberries, which I think is really high on a lot of people's lists. And maybe that's just because, it's a more light-hearted message in tone, and it's also maybe the and for Bergman, I mean, this is like, people say this about certain directors who it's the most straightforward of the bunch, and it might be probably the easiest to follow. Quite frankly, it's probably the softest landing point, or starting point rather. So I would recommend it. That's where I started too. Maybe it needs a rewatch, uh, because um, it's last in the rankings of what I've seen so far. But I think I was able to appreciate it, obviously, but every other movie kind of is able to surpass it in one area or another, whilst having that baseline across the board, that consistency that Bergman has had in his long prime. Um, so definitely, I would recommend all of these movies, though. And let me know what your rankings are. I know I already asked that, but I would love to see, what you think of Bergman, what your favorite movie is, and what you disagree with me as far as my rankings go. But without further ado, let's go into Lars Von Trier's debut album slash movie slash story on the big screen, and that is The Element of Crime. It's sepia. It's dilapidated. It is. It's. It uses a very cool kind of narrative device, in that we are getting. I'm trying to hypnosis to uncover the story within the mind of our narrator slash main character. And this one, I'm going to kind of abbreviate the whole summary of everything. Um, I called it revisiting Lars von Trier, because the first movie I watched with him was actually, and I don't know if it's still the case, but at the time it was his latest movie, and that was The House That Jack Built, which I really like. It's definitely too low on my list of horror movies, because I think it's due for a rewatch. But anywho, it was kind of neat to get to see, beginning, and it's not the end, but where he left off rather. In this one, it shows really neat elements. It really kind of feels like it's the story is told in its own world. As I take a little sippy break, that is neat to kind of see how everything is just like they everything is surrounded. It's almost like Waterworld esque. It reminds me a lot of Stalker, kind of the way that everything feels so run down, and it's like the shell of what a former city or village or community town used to be, with the sepia kind of filter over everything. I thought it was a very solid movie. I kind of liked the path that it chose to take. Um, I don't know if it was absolutely gripping. And this is definitely, and I've said it before with the other directors, it's been a while since I've seen him. It's kind of like a reintroduction to him. And I think I need to get to know Von Trier more through his filmography before I can truly appreciate this, because it's different. And I think Von Trier wants that. A lot of people consider this to be, neo noir in its own way. It really takes on that genre and kind of spins it and makes it a unique package. It was enjoyable. It was, and I kind of found what it was trying to do a really brilliant idea. And overall, I've said this on many episodes before, but if you're new here, I'm a big fan of true crime, and I think that we see evidence of this all the time, not to the extent that this story goes to it, but there's behavioral analysis units, which to me is like one of the most interesting facets of crime detectives, where they try to build the psychological profile of the unsub, or the suspect, which is trying to think like they think. And this is kind of taken to the level where it's like, well, I will literally go through the steps that they've done, which is also, you always want to retrace steps of suspects to kind of get a feel for what they were doing, where they've been, and if they left evidence. But it's like following in those footsteps, it turned our lead character into the person that he was searching, which this is the way to do it, in my opinion. Um, High Tension is a movie that gets a lot of talk, both good and bad. Um, there's less plot holes this way. So, that being said, it is a really tight, a really strong story. The visuals are really interesting. The whole setting feels very strong, and it adds a lot to the movie as a whole. And I'm going to be checking out more Lars von Trier. I know he's kind of one of those controversial directors, and a lot of people find him to be over the line into pretentious territory. And I think for the most part, a lot of the artistic choices he made in this movie did pay off, but you do wonder if if there was some pretension in this that did kind of make it that it wasn't quite like worth it. Too much style and not enough substance. In my mind, I think that's too hard of a criticism, but because quite frankly, I'm of the opinion where it's like push it to the absolute limit. Because if you have a message and you have a very unique way to get there, and you want to put a lot of style in it, do it. I think when you and this has such a strong message that it can kind of support the weight of how much sizzle it tries to put on the steak. So I would definitely recommend it, and I know a lot of people are diehard Von Trier fans, probably because of the amount of dejectors out there. So I'm certainly not one. Again, I do want to watch more of his stuff. I just feel like I have to come to more of an understanding of his films as a whole before I can truly appreciate it. And then the last film that I covered was Zombie. Oh, by the way, rating for Lars von Trier's The Element of Crime. I gave this one 3.5 stars. Very, very solid, and I do recommend. Now, the last one is Zombie Flesh Eaters, and I think it has the usual strengths that Fulci brings to the table. The makeup's always going to be good, and the action is going to be exciting. And it had just enough to really get you from one action sequence to the next. And it really pushes the bounds. Let's do underwater scenes, which are I would imagine hard to film, hard to keep the makeup consistent. And they were using a real shark at points, along with like a dummy shark. But overall, I think, I watched The Beyond, and I don't know if anything I've seen from Fulci has been able to surpass that yet. As far as the pacing, the intrigue of the story, combined with all the usual strengths that he is able to bring. The premise of it being voodoo, that's neat, but I wonder if maybe diving deeper into it would have been more interesting. And this is a criticism I've had, I think, from City of the Living Dead, and it's going to be on the next slide so I can get that title right. But where the human relationships aren't explored enough. There's just it's not quite enough in between the high points to keep it at like a consistent, like really great movie. Um, but that being said, it's certainly enjoyable. If you like zombie movies, trust me, you're gonna like this. You probably already seen it if you like zombie movies, but if you like, I mean, it's not gory, but for kind of like if you like gore, but not like to a sickening degree, this is great for that as well. It is very solid, Fulci, but I think it lacks the story, the backstory that the Beyond shined in to kind of get to that level or even surpass it. So this one I gave 3.5 stars, and I wanted to end on Italian horror ranked. So again, like as you can see, the Beyond super duper high, but Deep Red for me is giallo at its absolute best. Um, there's so much intrigue. The violence is just top tier, and again, it's not sickening violence. I mean, everyone's kind of palate for gore and violence is wildly different, but I don't. I it might be borderline for some people, but it's a little dated compared to what we see now. It's like if you see a limb get chopped off, it can look disturbingly real. In this, there's kind of, you're able to stay in the pocket to enjoy it, but not so much that you honestly start to feel like this intensity that, like, oh damn, like what did I just watch something, like, but the story is super duper strong with that, and it has all the elements that you really like in these Italian horror movies, with gore and makeup. It felt like Argento was keeping the huge strength that he has, and then being able to kind of use what Fulci is really good at. And he's the godfather of gore, and I feel like uh, Argento was able to kind of like get to that level of gore where it was really good while having a really good story. And the Beyond is kind of the from the flip side of the coin, where Fulci was able to kind of have an intriguing plot. It was something I felt very invested in the whole time. The trilogy as a whole, I was like super excited to watch. And City of the Living Dead is a part of that trilogy, and that was when I was like, oh, like a little bit disappointed that they didn't capitalize on it, because there's so much that could be done with it that I just felt like they weren't going into it enough. Maybe for good reason, but it was like in and I know I'm diving to the bottom of the list, but it's like it has great imagery, it has iconic shots, it has iconic gore, but they, I think, repeated some of the gore, and it, the new toy starts to lose its shine after a little bit. And I'm not, trying to crap on the movie at all because I did enjoy it. I just think my expectations were really high after watching The Beyond. Next is the opera. As far as like how a story unwinds and the process of the killer, that was just such a neat kind of, those choices that were made. It felt super duper unique, and I really, really appreciated that. Next is Suspiria, which is honestly, again, super iconic imagery. It's a really unique and cool story. And I honestly, I just kind of think knowing where it was going is what detracted a little bit of it from me. So maybe that's why it's, and I wouldn't say it's low because the three films above it on my list are pretty damn good, but maybe that's why it's not closer to the top. Next, we have Bava checking in with Blood and Black Lace. And honestly, for its time, like this feels like one of the cleaner, and I mean, like, as far as shots go and lighting and everything, it felt like the, I don't know if artistry is there, but like the workmanship, the eye was really there. Argento's really, really great at it too. I would not be surprised whatsoever if Argento picked up a lot of stuff from Bava when he started his, directorial career. Um, this feels like a really well shot movie, and it does lack some of the gore that are in pretty much every single other movie on this list, but it makes up for those like really clean shots, and the story was compelling. For the most part, all the motivations made sense and paid off really well. Then we have Zombie, which I just went over. I mean, makeup was really, really good. The gore was pretty dang good too. Phenomena has some absolutely visceral, gross out shots. It's neat, plays with paranormal, not activity, just paranormal in on its own. Um, which makes it stand out for a lot of people. And it'll usually it be on the flip side of the list where it'll be near the top, I think, because it's so different. Um, for me, I enjoyed it. I thought it did have really good elements. It was actually my introduction to Argento. I had seen parts of Suspiria prior, but Phenomena was the first one that I watched all the way through. So, in a way, it was maybe the sacrificial lamb where I was able to kind of begin to understand the director and then fully appreciate it later on. And then we end with City of the Living Dead, which, again, iconic shots. The priest hanging himself out of the gates is pretty damn intense. But I think I was looking for more of the story beats on that one. And I hope you enjoyed this movie, or this episode on movies, that is. And I thank you for watching. Thank you for liking, and I thank you very much for subscribing. I hope you enjoyed this, and let me know if you enjoyed this kind of structure, the way this was done. And obviously, I'm not going to be able to do lists after every single movie, but when applicable, I would love to. And this one is chock full of them. And so let me know what your thoughts were. Also, what are some movies you would like to see covered on this channel? And let me know if you would ever want to be a guest host as well. If you would like to chat about that, I would love to hear it. And again, thanks for checking this one out. I really appreciate y'all, and I will catch you on the flippity flip. Bye, y'all.